Sometimes the most broken souls find each other in the most unexpected places. Sometimes salvation comes on four legs when you least deserve it. Bo Redding had been running from his past for 15 years in the Colorado mountains. This grizzled man with silver beard and weathered hands lived alone, checking trap lines and avoiding people. He preferred the silence of the peaks to the noise of the world below. That October evening on Eagle's Spine Ridge changed everything. Bo heard desperate whimpers echoing through the pine trees. He found a half-starved shepherd dog caught in thorns, shaking but fierce. The animal's eyes held something that made Bo's chest tighten. Recognition, like the dog knew him. Bo freed the creature, expecting nothing more than a few days of company. He had no idea this dog would lead him to a buried cabin with his name carved in the doorframe and memories that weren't his own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thorn-tangled collar told a story Bo wasn't ready to read. Worn leather, cracked from weather and time, with stitching that spoke of careful hands and patient love. Someone had made this collar with purpose, had buckled it around a young dog's neck with hope for the years ahead. Now it hung from the brambles like a forgotten prayer, waiting for someone to notice. Bo Redding pulled his knife from his belt and cut the thorns away with practiced efficiency. The dog watched every movement, those intelligent brown eyes never leaving Bo's weathered face. When the last thorn fell away, the animal stepped forward and nudged Bo's hand with a wet nose, a gesture so simple, so trusting, that it nearly broke something loose in Bo's chest. "Easy there, boy," Bo murmured, his voice rusty from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to another living thing. "Let's get you back to the cabin." The walk down Eagle's Spine Ridge took 40 minutes in good weather. Tonight, with the dog limping beside him and storm clouds gathering overhead, it stretched longer. Bo's cabin sat in a natural clearing, protected by towering pines that had weathered a century of mountain storms. He'd built it himself 15 years ago, when he first came to these peaks with nothing but grief and a desperate need to disappear. Inside, the cabin reflected the man who lived there. Functional, sparse, stripped down to necessities. A wood-burning stove dominated one corner, its cast-iron surface scarred from years of use. A single bed occupied another corner, military-tight and covered with wool blankets. Shelves lined the walls, holding tools, canned goods and medical supplies. The only decoration was his grandfather's compass, mounted on the mantel above the stove, though it hadn't pointed true north in years. Bo lit the oil lamp and examined the dog more carefully. German Shepherd, maybe 2 years old, lean from hunger but well-muscled underneath. No collar except the empty one they'd found in the thorns. No tags, no identification. The dog's coat was thick and healthy, despite his recent hardship, suggesting someone had cared for him properly before he'd gotten lost. "You're a long way from anywhere," Bo said, opening a can of beef stew. He spooned half into a bowl for the dog, who wolfed it down with grateful efficiency. "No roads up here for 50 miles. How'd you get so far out?" The dog looked up from his empty bowl, and for a moment Bo felt that strange recognition again. Something in those eyes seemed familiar, though he was certain he'd never seen this animal before. The feeling unsettled him, like remembering a dream you couldn't quite grasp. Bo's own meal tasted like ash, as most meals had for the past 15 years. He ate from habit rather than hunger, his mind wandering to the life he'd left behind. Sarah's laugh echoing through their kitchen in Denver. Tommy's excited chatter about baseball practice and school friends. The small house with yellow shutters where they'd planned to grow old together. The dog settled by the stove, but his eyes remained alert, watching Bo with an intensity that seemed almost human. Bo tried to ignore it as he cleaned the dishes and banked the fire for the night. Outside, wind howled through the pines, and the first drops of sleet tapped against the windows. "Storm's coming," Bo said to the dog, who lifted his head as if he understood perfectly. "You picked a good night to find shelter." Bo had been a park ranger once, back when the world made sense. 13 years protecting Colorado's wilderness, teaching city folk about leave-no-trace principles and search and rescue techniques. He'd loved the work, loved sharing his knowledge of the mountains with families who came seeking adventure. Sarah used to joke that he cared more about trees than people, but it wasn't true. He'd cared about both. Then came that October day 15 years ago when everything changed. Tommy's school had organized a field trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. Sarah had volunteered to chaperone, excited to see her husband in his element, to watch him teach her son's classmates about the wilderness they both loved. Bo had been leading a group down the Emerald Lake Trail when the unseasonable storm hit. Sudden, vicious, turning familiar paths into death traps. The rockslide had been impossible to predict, impossible to prevent. One moment he was pointing out elk sign to a group of eager 8-year-olds. The next he was digging through rubble with his bare hands, screaming their names until his voice gave out. They'd found Sarah and Tommy together, Sarah's arms wrapped protectively around their son. Both had died instantly, the coroner said later. They hadn't suffered. Bo had suffered enough for all of them. The guilt had consumed him like acid. As the park ranger he should have known, should have read the weather signs better, should have turned the group around sooner, should have chosen a different trail. The official inquiry cleared him of any wrongdoing, but Bo knew better. He'd failed them when they needed him most. After the funeral, he'd resigned from the park service and disappeared into the high country. These peaks had become his exile, his punishment, his attempt to atone for sins that couldn't be forgiven. He survived on savings, a small pension, and the occasional fur check from his trap lines. He spoke to no one, trusted no one, allowed no one close enough to lose. Until tonight. The dog had finished his meal, and now lay by the fire. But his eyes remained fixed on Bo. There was something unnerving about that steady gaze, as if the animal could see straight through to the broken places Bo kept hidden, as if he understood the weight of 15 years' worth of guilt and regret. "What are you looking at?" Bo muttered, but his voice lacked any real irritation. Truth was, the company felt good after so many years of silence. Even if it was just a lost dog who'd probably wander off once the storm passed. The wind picked up outside, rattling the cabin's windows and sending pine needles skittering across the roof. Bo checked the stove one more time, making sure the damper was set properly for the night. The dog watched every movement, and when Bo finally settled into his chair with a cup of coffee, the animal rose and padded over to lie at his feet. "Making yourself at home, aren't you?" Bo said, but he didn't push the dog away. The warmth felt good against his legs, and the quiet presence filled some emptiness he hadn't realized was there. He'd call the dog Ridge, Bo decided, after the place where they'd found each other, where his solitary life had suddenly become something different. Ridge seemed to approve of the name, his tail thumping once against the floor before settling into sleep. Bo sat in his chair long into the night, listening to the storm rage outside and the dog's steady breathing at his feet. For the first time in 15 years, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. For the first time since Sarah and Tommy died, Bo Redding wasn't completely alone. The grandfather's compass caught the lamplight from the mantel, its brass surface gleaming. The needle sat motionless, pointing nowhere, broken like everything else from his old life. But tonight, with Ridge sleeping peacefully beside him, Bo almost thought he saw it twitch. Just slightly, as if trying to remember which way was home. The wedding ring had been lost for 15 years, buried somewhere in the rubble of that terrible day. Bo had searched for it in the weeks after the funeral, combing through the rockslide debris until his fingers bled and park officials forced him to stop. Sarah's ring, a simple gold band with tiny diamonds that caught the light, when she gestured with her hands, had vanished along with everything else that mattered. Now it lay gleaming in a small wooden box, hidden beneath loose floorboards, as if it had been waiting for him to find it. The morning had started like any other. Bo woke before dawn to Ridge's insistent whining, though the dog wasn't asking to go outside. Instead, he paced by the door with an agitation Bo had never seen before. His ears pricked forward and his body tense with alertness. "What's got into you, boy?" Bo asked. But Ridge only whined louder and scratched at the door. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world crystalline and sharp under a brittle blue sky. Fresh snow dusted the peaks, and the air carried that particular silence that comes after mountain weather, clean and expectant. As if the earth itself was holding its breath, Bo followed Ridge outside, expecting the dog to relieve himself and settle down. Instead, Ridge trotted purposefully toward the northern slope, looking back every few steps to make sure Bo was following. His behavior was so unlike the calm, grateful animal of the night before that Bo found himself reaching for the rifle he kept mounted by the door. "Ridge, come back here," Bo called, but the dog had already disappeared into the tree line. Bo cursed under his breath and followed, his boots crunching through the thin layer of snow. The northern slope was tricky terrain, even in good weather, loose shale hidden under seemingly solid ground, ready to shift underfoot and send a man tumbling into the ravine below. He'd lost a good pair of boots to that slope 2 winters back and had no desire to lose anything more valuable. Ridge waited at the edge of a small clearing, his body rigid with concentration. Bo was about to scold him when he heard it, a deep rumble that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. The sound rolled up from somewhere far below, growing louder with each passing second. "Son of a—" Bo grabbed Ridge and dove sideways just as the avalanche hit. The wall of snow and debris thundered past them, obliterating the path they'd been walking moments before. Trees snapped like matchsticks, boulders the size of automobiles tumbled past, and the air filled with a roar that drowned out thought itself. Bo pressed himself against a granite outcropping, shielding Ridge with his body as the mountain remade itself around them. When the rumbling finally stopped, Bo's ears rang with silence. Where there had been a gentle slope moments before, now there was only a raw scar of exposed rock and churned earth. The avalanche had carved a new path down the mountainside, taking out everything in its way. "How did you know?" Bo whispered to Ridge, who looked up at him with those 2 intelligent eyes. "How did you know it was coming?" Dogs could sense earthquakes, Bo told himself. They had better hearing than humans, could detect subtle changes in air pressure. There had to be a logical explanation for why Ridge had led him away from danger just in time. Had to be. But as they picked their way back toward the cabin, Bo couldn't shake the feeling that Ridge had saved his life deliberately. The dog stayed close, checking on Bo every few steps, as if making sure his human was unharmed. It was protective behavior that seemed almost human in its concern. The rockfall came 3 hours later. Bo was checking his trapline on the eastern ridge when Ridge suddenly planted himself in front of Bo's path, refusing to budge. The dog's hackles were raised, and he stared fixedly at the cliff face above them. Bo followed his gaze, but saw nothing except solid granite and a few scraggly pines clinging to the rocks. "Move, Ridge," Bo said impatiently. "There's nothing there," Ridge growled, the first aggressive sound Bo had heard from him. The dog backed up, trying to push Bo away from the cliff with his body. Bo was about to step around him when the rocks started falling. First came the small stones, pinging off the larger boulders like hail. Then came the bigger pieces, crashing down with enough force to shatter bones. Finally, a chunk of granite the size of a refrigerator broke loose and smashed into the exact spot where Bo had been standing moments before. "Jesus," Bo breathed, staring at the destruction. Without Ridge's warning, he would have been crushed. No question about it. The dog was already moving again, trotting back toward the cabin with an air of satisfied purpose. Bo followed on unsteady legs, his mind reeling with questions he couldn't answer. 2 incidents in one day was beyond coincidence. Ridge was warning him about dangers before they happened, displaying an awareness that defied every natural law Bo understood. Back at the cabin, Bo needed to think. He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in his chair, staring at Ridge, who had settled by the fire as if nothing unusual had happened. The dog's calm demeanor only made the whole situation more unsettling. "What are you?" Bo asked aloud. "Where did you come from?" Ridge tilted his head, but offered no answers. Bo had lived in these mountains long enough to know their moods, their rhythms, their dangers. He could read weather patterns in cloud formations, predict rock slides from the sound of shifting scree. But he'd never encountered anything like this, an animal that seemed to possess knowledge beyond the natural world. The whiskey burned his throat, but it didn't touch the cold fear growing in his chest. Fear mixed with something else, something he didn't want to name. Hope. For 15 years, he'd lived with the crushing weight of failure, the knowledge that he'd failed to protect the people who mattered most. Now this strange dog was protecting him, keeping him safe from dangers he couldn't see coming. Maybe he was losing his mind. Maybe the isolation had finally driven him over the edge, and he was imagining supernatural abilities in a perfectly ordinary dog. Maybe, but the avalanche had been real. The rockfall had been real, and Ridge's warnings had saved his life both times. Bo finished his whiskey and decided to search the cabin, looking for anything that might explain the dog's presence. He'd lived here for 15 years, knew every board and nail in the structure. But tonight, driven by whiskey and desperation, he looked deeper. That's when he found the loose floorboards. Hidden beneath them was a small wooden box, old and weathered but perfectly preserved. Bo's hands shook as he lifted the lid, and his heart stopped when he saw what lay inside. Sarah's wedding ring glinted in the lamplight, exactly as beautiful as the day he'd slipped it onto her finger. Beside it lay other small treasures he recognized. Her favorite earrings, a locket with Tommy's baby picture, a pressed flower from their honeymoon in Aspen, things that had been lost in the rock slide, things he'd grieved for almost as much as he'd grieved for his family. But how had they gotten here? This cabin had been built years after their deaths, on land he'd never shared with them. There was no way these items could have found their way into his floorboards, unless they'd been waiting for him to find them. Bo sank to his knees beside the box. Sarah's ring clutched in his trembling fingers. 15 years of carefully controlled grief came pouring out all at once, great gasping sobs that shook his whole body. He cried for Sarah's laugh and Tommy's smile, for Sunday mornings and Christmas dinners and all the ordinary moments that had made up their life together. He cried for the future they'd never have, for the grandchildren he'd never meet, for the love that had been ripped away too soon. Ridge appeared beside him, pressing his warm body against Bo's shaking shoulders. The dog's presence was steady and comforting, as if he understood exactly what Bo was feeling, as if he'd been sent to witness this moment, to help Bo through the worst of his pain. When the tears finally stopped, Bo looked up to find Ridge watching him with an expression of infinite patience and compassion. Those brown eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed impossible in an animal, a knowing that reached far beyond normal canine intelligence. "You're not just a dog, are you?" Bo whispered. Ridge's tail wagged once, slowly. For a moment, Bo could have sworn he saw something flicker behind those eyes, a flash of recognition, of acknowledgement, of something far more complex than animal instinct. Bo slipped Sarah's ring onto his pinky finger, the only finger it would fit after all these years. The weight of it felt familiar and strange at the same time, a tangible connection to the life he'd lost. But instead of the crushing despair he'd expected, he felt something else, peace. For the first time in 15 years, holding Sarah's ring didn't feel like drowning in grief. It felt like remembering love. Ridge settled beside him, and Bo buried his fingers in the dog's thick fur. Whatever was happening here, whatever Ridge truly was, Bo was no longer afraid. The dog had saved his life twice today and had somehow returned his wife's ring to him. If that wasn't a miracle, it was close enough. Outside, the mountain wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin, Bo Redding was no longer alone with his ghosts. He had Ridge now, and Ridge seemed to understand things about life and death and the spaces in between that Bo was only beginning to grasp. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start asking different questions. Tonight, he would simply be grateful that some mysteries came bearing gifts instead of grief. The hand-carved wooden cross lay buried under 3 inches of pine needles and 15 years of weather. Its surface worn smooth, but still bearing the unmistakable initials, SR plus BR plus TR, Sarah Redding, Bo Redding, Tommy Redding. A family that had been carved in wood that had no business being here. Bo knelt beside the old ranger station, his hands shaking as he brushed the debris away from the cross. Ridge sat nearby, watching with that patient intelligence that had become familiar over the past 3 days. The dog had led him here deliberately, just as he'd led Bo away from the avalanche and rockfall. But this discovery felt different, more personal, more impossible. The abandoned ranger station squatted among the pines like a forgotten memory, its log walls grey with age and its windows boarded shut. Bo had discovered it during his 2nd year on the mountain, had used it occasionally for shelter during long trap runs. He'd explored every inch of the structure, but had never noticed the cross buried behind it. Of course, he'd never had Ridge to show him where to look. Bo stood up slowly, the cross cradled in his palms. The wood was unfamiliar, not pine or aspen, but something darker, harder. The carving was precise, done with skill and patience by someone who knew their craft. Most unsettling of all, the initials looked fresh despite the cross's obvious age, as if they'd been carved yesterday rather than decades ago. "This doesn't make sense," Bo said aloud. Ridge tilted his head, but offered no explanations. Bo had come to the station looking for answers, hoping the old records might contain some clue about Ridge's origins or the strange events of recent days. The station had been abandoned since the late 70s, when budget cuts forced the Park Service to consolidate operations. Most of the equipment had been removed, but filing cabinets full of old reports and logs remained. He'd spent the morning reading through incident reports from the 40s and 50s, looking for anything unusual. What he'd found was a pattern of stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. Hikers saved from avalanches by mysterious animals, lost souls guided to safety by dogs that vanished without a trace, wildlife displaying impossible intelligence and awareness. One report from 1947 described a German shepherd that had led a search party to 3 missing children, then disappeared into the wilderness despite attempts to follow it. Another from 1952 told of a dog that had warned a geological survey team about an impending landslide, saving 7 lives. The descriptions varied, but the essential details remained constant: an intelligent animal appearing at moments of crisis, providing help, then vanishing as suddenly as it had come. Ridge wasn't the first of his kind. He was part of something larger, something that had been happening in these mountains for decades. The old radio equipment still worked, surprisingly. Bo had managed to raise old Pete Kowalski, a retired ranger who'd spent 40 years in these mountains before arthritis forced him down to the valley. Pete's voice crackled through the static, warm with surprise and concern. "Bo Redding, Jesus, son, I haven't heard from you in 5 years. Thought you might have finally gone completely native up there." "Still breathing, Pete. I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me a straight answer." "Shoot." Bo hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question without sounding insane. "You ever encounter anything unusual up here? Animals acting strange, things that didn't quite add up?" The silence stretched long enough that Bo wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, Pete's voice came through, quieter than before. "What kind of unusual are we talking about, Bo?" "Dogs. Shepherds, specifically, appearing when people are in trouble, then disappearing." Another long pause. When Pete spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "There's things folks don't talk about, Bo. Things that happen up in the high country that don't make sense to people living down in the valley. I learned a long time ago that some questions are better left unasked. I'm asking anyway." Pete sighed, the sound harsh through the radio static. "I saw one once, back in '73, during that late blizzard that caught everyone by surprise. I was leading a rescue team looking for some college kids who'd gotten lost on the Continental Divide. We'd been searching for 2 days, running out of time and hope. What happened? Dog showed up out of nowhere, big German shepherd just like you're describing, led us straight to where the kids were holed up in a snow cave, half frozen but alive. When we tried to follow the dog afterward, it just vanished." "Yeah, poof," gone like smoke. Bo stared at Ridge, who was listening to the conversation with obvious interest. "Did you ever figure out where it came from?" "Spent years trying. Asked the old-timers, the Ute elders who knew these mountains before we ever showed up. They had stories, Bo. Stories about spirit guides and guardian animals, souls that stayed behind to help the living. Most folks would call it superstition. What would you call it?" "I'd call it something I don't understand but learn to respect. These mountains are old, Bo. Older than our science, older than our need to explain everything. Sometimes you just have to accept that some things exist beyond our understanding." The radio crackled, and Pete's voice became urgent. "Bo, why are you asking about this? You encounter something up there?" Bo looked at Ridge, who was watching him with those two intelligent eyes. "Yeah, Pete, I think I did." "Be careful, son. Whatever you're dealing with, it chose you for a reason. Don't take that lightly." The radio connection faded into static, leaving Bo alone with his thoughts and the wooden cross that shouldn't exist. He walked back to where Ridge waited, the dog's presence somehow more significant now that he understood the pattern. Ridge wasn't unique. He was part of a tradition, a guardian force that had been protecting people in these mountains for generations. But why Bo? What made him special enough to deserve supernatural intervention? The answer, he suspected, lay in the cross. Someone had carved his family's initials into this wood, had buried it behind the ranger station where only Ridge would know to find it. Someone who knew about Sarah and Tommy, who understood the depth of Bo's grief and guilt. As they walked back toward the cabin, Ridge leading the way with confident steps, Bo felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Purpose. For the first time since the rockslide, he had questions that mattered, mysteries that demanded solving. The isolation that had been his punishment was beginning to feel like preparation instead. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying scents of snow and pine resin and something else, something that reminded Bo of Sunday mornings and Christmas trees and his son's laughter echoing through a house that no longer existed. For just a moment, walking behind his impossible guardian, Bo Redding almost felt like he was heading home. Ridge paused at the top of a rise and looked back, waiting for Bo to catch up. In the afternoon light, the dog's eyes held depths that seemed to stretch beyond sight, as if they reflected not just the sky above, but something infinitely larger, something that had been watching over these mountains long before Bo arrived and would continue watching long after he was gone. Bo touched the cross in his pocket, feeling the smooth wood and precise carving that connected him to mysteries he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, he would start asking different questions. Tonight, he would simply follow where Ridge led, trusting in guidance that came from places beyond human understanding. The path ahead wound through shadow and sunlight, familiar territory made strange by new knowledge. Bo had walked these trails alone for 15 years, but now he realized he'd never truly been alone at all. Something had been watching, waiting, preparing for the moment when he'd be ready to see beyond his own grief. That moment, it seemed, had finally arrived. The faded photograph should not have existed. Bo stared at the image with growing disbelief, his hands trembling as he held it up to the cave's dim light. 3 faces looked back at him from across impossible decades. A man with his exact features, a woman who could have been Sarah's twin, and a boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Tommy. But the clothing was wrong, the hairstyles decades out of date, and the date stamped on the back read October 1947, 28 years before Bo was even born. Ridge had led him to the cave system that morning, following a route Bo had never noticed despite 15 years of exploring these mountains. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the caves stretched deeper than seemed possible, their walls smooth and worn by countless years of underground water flow. The photograph had been waiting on a natural stone shelf, as if someone had placed it there specifically for Bo to find. Beside it lay other items that made no sense. A compass identical to his grandfather's, a pocket knife with initials that matched his own, a child's wooden toy that could have belonged to Tommy. "This isn't possible," Bo whispered, but Ridge only watched him with those patient, knowing eyes. For the past week, Ridge's behavior had become increasingly purposeful. The dog no longer simply accompanied Bo on his daily routines, he guided them, leading Bo to specific locations with an agenda that seemed to stretch beyond mere companionship. Each destination revealed something impossible, something that challenged Bo's understanding of reality itself. Yesterday, Ridge had led him to a grove of aspen trees where the bark bore carved initials, BR plus SR, surrounded by a heart. The carving was old, weathered by decades of seasons, but Bo had never been to that grove before meeting Sarah. He'd never carved their initials anywhere except in his memory. The day before, Ridge had guided him to a hidden meadow where wildflowers grew in an impossible pattern, Sarah's favorite blooms arranged in perfect rows, as if someone had planted a garden and tended it for years. But the meadow was miles from any trail, accessible only through terrain so rough that Bo could barely imagine anyone hauling soil and seeds to such a remote location. Now, this photograph, showing faces that belonged to his family but couldn't be his family. The implications made his head spin and his chest tighten with something between fear and hope. Ridge padded deeper into the cave, looking back expectantly. Bo followed, clutching the photograph and fighting the urge to turn and run. Whatever answers waited in the darkness ahead. He wasn't sure he was ready to face them. The cave opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow above. More artifacts waited here, dozens of them scattered across stone shelves and natural alcoves, like a museum of impossible memories. Bo recognized many of the items. Sarah's grandmother's brooch, Tommy's favorite baseball cap, his own father's war medals. Things that had been lost or given away, or buried with the dead, now somehow gathered in this hidden place beneath the mountain. "What is this?" Bo asked aloud, his voice echoing off the cave walls. "What are you trying to show me?" Ridge sat in the center of the chamber, his gaze fixed on Bo with an intensity that was almost human. For a moment, the dog's form seemed to shimmer, as if he wasn't quite solid, as if he existed somewhere between the physical world and something else entirely. Bo approached one of the stone shelves, examining the artifacts more closely. Each item carried emotional weight, memories that struck him like physical blows. Sarah's engagement ring, not the wedding band he'd found in his cabin, but the elaborate diamond solitaire she'd worn before the ceremony. Tommy's first tooth, carefully preserved in a small glass vial. A love letter Bo had written to Sarah during their courtship, folded and refolded until the paper was soft as cloth. None of these things should have been here. Some had been buried with his family, others lost to time and distance. Yet here they were, arranged with care and precision, as if someone had been collecting pieces of his life for decades. The emotional impact was overwhelming. Bo sank to his knees in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the physical remnants of everything he'd lost. 15 years of carefully maintained numbness cracked open like ice in spring, releasing a flood of memories he'd fought to suppress. Sarah laughing at his terrible jokes, Tommy's excited chatter about his latest adventure, Sunday mornings in bed, reading newspapers and planning their future, Halloween costumes and birthday parties and quiet evenings when they were simply content to exist in each other's presence. The grief was still there, sharp and immediate as ever. But underneath it, Bo felt something else stirring, a warmth he'd thought was gone forever. Love. Not the desperate, clinging love of someone trying to hold on to the past, but the steady, enduring love of someone who had been truly blessed. Ridge moved closer, pressing his warm body against Bo's side. The dog's presence was comforting, grounding, a reminder that Bo wasn't facing these revelations alone. Whatever Ridge truly was, wherever he'd come from, he understood the weight of what Bo was experiencing. "They're really gone, aren't they?" Bo said softly. "Sarah and Tommy, they're not coming back." Ridge's tail wagged once, gently. Not celebration, but acknowledgement. Yes, they were gone, but they had been here, they had mattered, and the love they'd shared continued to exist even in their absence. Bo picked up the photograph again, studying the faces that looked so much like his family. Maybe it didn't matter how these artifacts had gotten here, or why they existed. Maybe the important thing was what they represented. Proof that love transcended death, that some connections were too strong to be broken by tragedy. Standing up slowly, Bo looked around the chamber one more time. The artifacts would stay here, he decided. This was their proper place, a shrine to memory hidden beneath the mountain. But he would carry their meaning with him when he left. Ridge was already moving toward a different passage, one Bo hadn't noticed before. The dog paused at the entrance, looking back with an expression that was clearly an invitation. More to see, more to understand, Bo followed without hesitation. Whatever Ridge was showing him, whatever impossible journey this had become, he was committed now. The numbness that had protected him for 15 years was gone, burned away by the intensity of rediscovered feeling. In its place was something he'd almost forgotten existed, curiosity about what came next. The passage led upward, climbing toward what Bo hoped was daylight. Behind them, the chamber of artifacts settled back into darkness, holding its treasures and memories safe for the next time someone needed to remember that love was stronger than loss. Ridge's form moved ahead of him like a beacon, leading him toward answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. But ready or not, Bo Redding was finally moving forward instead of hiding from the past. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like progress. Tommy's baseball glove lay on a boulder beside Crystal Lake, oiled and supple, as if it had been used yesterday. The leather was perfectly conditioned, the pocket formed by thousands of catches, the laces tight and ready for action. Stitched into the thumb was Tommy's name, in his own careful 8-year-old handwriting. Each letter painstakingly formed with a permanent marker. Bo picked up the glove with shaking hands, bringing it to his face to breathe in the familiar scent of leather and childhood dreams. This was impossible on so many levels that he'd stopped trying to count them. Tommy had never been to Crystal Lake. The family had never hiked this far into the wilderness together. The glove had been buried with Tommy, clutched in his small hands as he lay in his casket, yet here it was, warm from the morning sun. As real as the mountain air filling Bo's lungs, Ridge sat nearby, watching Bo's reaction, with that patient intelligence that had become both comforting and unnerving. Over the past 2 weeks, the dog had led Bo to increasingly impossible discoveries, artifacts and memories scattered across the mountain like breadcrumbs, leading toward some ultimate revelation. Crystal Lake reflected the morning sky like polished glass, its surface broken only by the occasional rise of a trout seeking insects. Bo had been coming to this lake for years, finding peace in its isolation and beauty. He'd never noticed the boulder before, though he was certain he'd explored every inch of the shoreline. "How is this happening?" Bo asked aloud, clutching the glove to his chest. "How are these things getting here?" Ridge tilted his head but offered no answers. The dog's silence had become another constant, as if he understood Bo's questions perfectly, but knew the answers had to come from somewhere else. Bo slipped his hand into the glove, feeling how perfectly it fit despite being sized for a child. For a moment he could almost hear Tommy's voice calling from across their backyard in Denver, asking Bo to play catch before dinner. The memory was so vivid it made his chest ache with longing. Tommy had loved baseball with the pure passion that only 8-year-olds could muster. He'd played Little League 3 seasons, pitched for the Tigers, and dreamed of making it to the major leagues someday. His room had been decorated with posters of Colorado Rockies players, and he'd fallen asleep each night listening to games on his transistor radio. The night before the school trip that changed everything, Tommy had made Bo promise they'd practice his curveball when they got home. Bo had agreed, ruffling his son's hair and promising they'd work on it all weekend. It was a promise he'd never been able to keep. Bo closed his eyes and let the memories flow, not the terrible final day, but the thousands of good days that had come before. Teaching Tommy to throw a fastball, cheering from the bleachers as his son connected with his first home run, the proud grin on Tommy's face when he'd successfully caught a pop fly that would have been impossible just months before. The grief was still there, sharp and immediate, but wrapped around it was something else. Gratitude for the time they'd had, appreciation for a love that had been real and meaningful even if it had been cut short. Tommy had existed, had mattered, had brought joy to the world during his brief time in it. Ridge stood and moved to the edge of the lake, his reflection wavering in the gentle current. The dog's patience seemed infinite, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for Bo to process what he was experiencing. "You're not really a dog, are you?" Bo said, though he already knew the answer. "You're something else." Someone else. Ridge's tail wagged once, a gentle acknowledgement. In the morning light, his form seemed less solid somehow, as if he existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Bo had the unsettling sense that he was seeing only part of Ridge's true nature, that the dog form was simply the shape his mind could accept. Bo walked to the lake's edge, still holding Tommy's glove. The water was crystal clear, revealing the rocky bottom and the schools of small fish that darted between the stones. For the first time in 15 years, looking at this perfect natural beauty didn't fill him with guilt for being able to appreciate it while his family could not. Instead, he felt something that might have been peace. Tommy would have loved this place, would have spent hours trying to catch the fish with his bare hands, while Sarah laughed at his determination. The thought brought sadness, but it was a clean sadness, uncomplicated by self-recrimination. "I miss them," Bo said to Ridge. "Every day, I miss them so much it feels like drowning." Ridge padded over and pressed against Bo's leg, offering wordless comfort. The dog's warmth was real and immediate, a reminder that Bo wasn't completely alone, even in his grief. They stayed by the lake for most of the morning, Bo lost in memories while Ridge kept patient watch. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and bringing the mountain alive with birdsong and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. It was the kind of perfect day that Sarah and Tommy would have treasured, full of simple beauty and peaceful silence. When they finally headed back toward the cabin, Bo carried Tommy's glove with him. Unlike the other artifacts, this one felt like it was meant to come home. He could display it on his mantle, a reminder not just of loss, but of love. A tangible connection to the son who had brought such joy to his life. The walk back took them through terrain that seemed both familiar and strange. Ridge led the way along paths Bo was certain he'd never seen before, yet every turn felt like coming home. The dog moved with absolute confidence, as if he'd traveled these routes countless times. As they crested the final ridge before the cabin, Bo paused to look back at the landscape they'd covered. From this height, he could see Crystal Lake glinting in the distance, the cave system where he'd found the photograph, the grove where their initials had been carved into aspen bark, all of it connected by trails that seemed to exist specifically for his journey. "You've been planning this for a long time, haven't you?" Bo said to Ridge. "All of it. The avalanche warning, finding Sarah's ring, leading me to these places. You've been trying to heal something in me." Ridge looked up at him with those infinite brown eyes, and for just a moment, Bo saw something flicker behind them. Not just animal intelligence, but something deeper, recognition, love. The patient understanding of someone who had been waiting a very long time for Bo to be ready for this journey. The cabin came into view as they rounded the last bend, solid and welcoming in the afternoon light. Home. For the first time since building it, the word felt right. Not a hiding place or a punishment, but simply home. Bo fingered Tommy's glove as they approached the door, feeling the worn leather and remembering his son's excitement about the game. Tomorrow he might even play catch with Ridge, tossing a tennis ball and pretending for a few minutes that time had folded back on itself. Tonight, though, he would simply be grateful for the memories and the mysterious guide who had helped him find them again. The ancient medicine pouch felt warm against Bo's palm, its leather soft as velvet, despite what had to be centuries of age. Inside, herbs and stones clicked together with a sound like distant chimes, and when Bo opened the drawstring, the scent that emerged was both foreign and familiar, sage and sweetgrass, cedar and something else he couldn't identify, but that made his chest tighten with inexplicable emotion. Ridge had found it buried beneath a cairn of stones on what old Pete later told him was sacred Ute ground, a place where the mountain spirits were said to dwell. The medicine pouch seemed to pulse with its own energy, responding to Bo's touch in ways that defied rational explanation. The Ute called this place Spirit's Rest. Pete's voice crackled through the radio that evening. Said it was where souls came to find their way home. Your grandfather knew about it, spent time with the tribal elders back in the 30s, learned some of their ways. Bo fingered the pouch which rested on his kitchen table like a bridge between worlds. You never mentioned that before. Wasn't my story to tell, and you weren't ready to hear it. Your grandfather was a seeker, Bo, not content with just the surface of things. He understood that these mountains held more than timber and wildlife. Outside, a storm was building. Not the natural weather patterns Bo had learned to read over 15 years, but something wilder, more primal. Lightning flickered without thunder, and the wind carried sounds that didn't quite match any animal he knew. Ridge paced by the windows, his agitation growing with each flash of unnatural light. The medicine pouch chose you, Pete continued. That's how it works with the old things. They wait until the right person comes along, someone who needs what they have to offer. What do they offer? Understanding, connection, the ability to see beyond the veil that separates the living from the dead. Bo's hand stilled on the pouch. You're talking about ghosts. I'm talking about love that doesn't end with death, son. About bonds that are stronger than the grave. The Ute understood that some spirits stay behind not because they're trapped, but because they have work to finish. The storm intensified, and Ridge's whining became urgent. The dog moved to the door, then back to Bo, then to the door again. His message was clear. They needed to leave the cabin, and they needed to leave now. Bo had learned to trust Ridge's warnings. He grabbed his coat and followed the dog into the night, the medicine pouch clutched in his hand. The storm swirled around them, but instead of the cold mountain wind he expected, the air felt warm and electric, charged with possibilities. Ridge led him through the darkness with supernatural confidence, following paths that seemed to exist only for this moment. Behind them, Bo could hear the storm raging, but where they walked, the air was still and expectant. It was as if they moved through a pocket of calm in the center of chaos. They crested a ridge Bo had never seen before, though he was certain he'd explored every inch of this terrain. Below them, a valley opened up that defied geography, too large for the space it occupied, filled with a soft light that came from no visible source. And in that impossible valley, Bo saw them, two figures walking together, their forms translucent but unmistakably familiar. Zara moved with the graceful stride he remembered, her dark hair catching light that wasn't there. Tommy skipped beside her, his energy irrepressible even in whatever state of being this was. They were together and they were at peace. Bo's breath caught in his throat. Sarah, Tommy. They couldn't hear him, or if they could, they chose not to respond. They were focused on their own journey, following a path that led toward a distant light. But as they walked, Sarah turned her head in Bo's direction, and for just a moment, her face was illuminated with an expression of infinite love and understanding. She nodded once, a gesture that conveyed everything words couldn't express. We're okay. We love you. Let us go. Tears streamed down Bo's face as he watched them continue their journey. This wasn't a haunting or a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. This was a gift, a chance to see that death wasn't an ending, but a transition, that the love they'd shared continued to exist, even if its form had changed. Ridge pressed against his side, offering comfort as Bo processed what he was witnessing. The dog's presence was warm and solid, an anchor in this moment between worlds. Without Ridge, Bo realized, he never would have been able to see this vision. The medicine pouch, the sacred ground, the supernatural storm. All of it had been necessary to thin the veil enough for this goodbye. Thank you, Bo whispered to Ridge. though he suspected his gratitude extended far beyond the dog himself. "Thank you for showing me this." The figures in the valley continued their journey until they merged with the distant light and disappeared. The valley itself began to fade, the soft illumination dimming until only ordinary darkness remained. The storm that had been raging around them settled into gentle rain, washing the mountain clean. When they returned to the cabin, Bo felt fundamentally changed. The crushing weight he'd carried for 15 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something bearable. Grief was still there, but it was clean grief now, uncomplicated by guilt or regret. Sarah and Tommy were gone, but they had been real, and their love had mattered. The medicine pouch sat on his table, no longer pulsing with energy, but somehow still significant. Bo understood now that it was more than an artifact. It was a tool, a way of connecting with forces beyond ordinary understanding. In the right hands, at the right time, it could offer glimpses of truths that existed beyond the physical world. Over the following days, Bo found himself using his newfound clarity in unexpected ways. When a group of lost hikers wandered into his territory, half frozen and disoriented, Ridge led him to them with unerring precision. Bo guided them to safety, sharing his shelter and supplies without thought of reward. When a rock slide trapped a young climber on the southern face, Ridge's supernatural awareness allowed them to reach the victim in time. Bo used skills he'd thought were lost forever, rappelling down treacherous terrain to perform a rescue that would have been impossible without Ridge's guidance. Each time he helped someone, Bo felt a piece of his old self returning. Not the broken man who had fled to the mountains, but the person he'd been before the tragedy, someone who found purpose in protecting others, in using his knowledge of the wilderness to keep people safe. "I understand now," Bo said to Ridge one evening as they sat by the fire. "This is why you came to me. Not just to heal my grief, but to show me what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life." Ridge's tail wagged once, slowly. The dog's eyes held depths that seemed to encompass centuries, as if he'd been waiting a very long time for Bo to reach this understanding. There was approval in that gaze, and something that might have been pride. The medicine pouch rested on the mantel. Beside Tommy's baseball glove and Sarah's wedding ring, artifacts of a journey that had transformed a broken hermit into something approaching a whole man again. Bo wasn't ready for civilization yet, might never be ready for the noise and complications of the world below. But he was ready to be useful again, ready to find purpose in service to others. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying scents of snow and pine resin and something else, something that spoke of possibilities and second chances. Bo Redding was no longer hiding from his past. He was preparing for whatever came next, guided by a mysterious companion who understood the deepest truths about life, death, and the love that bridges the space between them. Bo's own handwriting stared back at him from the journal pages, but the words described experiences he'd never lived, dates he'd never been on the mountain. Entry after entry detailed rescues he'd never performed, conversations with Ridge spanning decades, encounters with lost souls seeking guidance home. The diary was written in his distinctive scrawl, worn from years of use, but it told the story of a life he'd never lived, until now. October 15th, 1995, he read aloud, his voice trembling. "Found a family lost in early blizzard. Mother, father, 2 children. Ridge led me to their shelter just in time. The youngest girl reminded me of Tommy. Same bright eyes, same fearless curiosity about the world." Ridge sat perfectly still beside the fireplace, watching as Bo's understanding began to crack apart. The journal had been hidden in a metal box beneath loose stones in the cabin's foundation, exactly where the dog had indicated Bo should dig. 28 years of entries, all in his handwriting, all describing a life he was certain he'd never lived. November 3rd, 1998. Bo continued reading. "The avalanche took the Johnson family before I could reach them. Ridge and I spent 3 days digging through the snow. Found them too late, but we brought them home to their people anyway. Some rescues are about closure, not salvation. Beau's hands shook as he flipped through page after page of impossible history. Each entry was detailed, specific, written with the voice of someone who had lived through genuine experiences. But Beau remembered none of it. His memory of the past 15 years was clear. Solitude, grief, the gradual numbing of everything that had once brought him joy. Or was it? As he read deeper into the journal, flashes of déjà vu began to surface. A mention of a red-haired hiker triggered a vague memory of desperate eyes and grateful tears. A description of a rock slide on the northern slope brought back the phantom taste of dust and the sound of Ridge's warning bark. These weren't his memories, yet somehow they felt familiar, like dreams half-remembered upon waking. "This is impossible," Beau whispered. But even as he said it, the certainty was crumbling. Ridge rose and moved to the window, his form seeming less solid in the lamplight. For a moment Beau could see through him to the darkness beyond, not transparency born of poor light, but the translucence of something that existed between dimensions. "What are you?" Beau asked again, though this time the question carried different weight. "What am I?" The dog turned back to him, and in those infinite brown eyes, Beau saw compassion that spanned centuries. Ridge approached slowly, and when he placed his paw on Beau's knee, the touch carried a shock of recognition that went deeper than memory. Images flooded Beau's mind, not his own experiences, but knowledge that had been buried beneath layers of protective delusion. The rock slide hadn't just killed Sarah and Tommy, it had killed him too. The search and rescue team had found 3 bodies that day, not 2. Beau Redding had died trying to save his family, had died failing to protect the people he loved most. Everything since, the hermit life in the mountains, the cabin he'd thought he'd built, the 15 years of isolation, it had all been something else. A test, a transition, a chance to work through the guilt and grief that had kept his soul bound to the earth, instead of moving on to whatever came next. "I'm dead," Beau said, the words feeling strange and impossible, even as he spoke them. "I've been dead for 15 years. Ridge's tail wagged once, gently. Not celebration, but acknowledgement. The truth was finally in the open. "But this feels real," Beau protested, looking around the cabin that had been his home for so long. "The cold, the hunger, the loneliness, all of it feels real." Ridge tilted his head, and somehow Beau understood. It was real in its way. The emotions, the experiences, the healing journey he'd been on, all of it mattered. But it was happening in a space between life and death, a place where souls worked through their unfinished business before moving on to whatever came next. The journal entries weren't fiction. They were a record of his true purpose here, his real life in this liminal space. For 15 years, he'd been serving as a guardian for lost souls, helping people find their way to safety, just as Ridge had helped him find his way to acceptance. The hermit persona had been a protective shell, a way of processing his own trauma while still fulfilling his deeper calling. "The people I've helped," Beau said, understanding dawning. "They were all real?" Ridge nodded, and more memories surfaced. Dozens of rescues, hundreds of encounters with lost hikers and climbers, and souls who'd wandered too far from their intended paths. Beau had been saving people for 15 years. He had been serving as a bridge between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond, but he'd been doing it unconsciously, protected by delusion from the full weight of his situation. The recent journey with Ridge, finding the artifacts, confronting his grief, accepting his family's death, it had all been preparation for this moment of revelation. "Why now?" Beau asked. "Why are you showing me this now?" Ridge moved to the door and looked back expectantly. The answer, Beau realized, lay outside. His training period was ending. The protective delusion that had allowed him to function was being stripped away because he was ready for the truth. Ready to make a conscious choice about his existence. Beau followed Ridge into the night, the journal clutched in his hands. The mountain air felt different now, thinner somehow, as if the barrier between worlds was wearing thin. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns that seemed both familiar and alien. and the aurora borealis danced across the sky. Despite being far too far south for such displays, they climbed toward a peak Bo had never noticed before, though it dominated the skyline like it had always been there. With each step, the physical world became less solid, more translucent. Bo could see through his own hands to the ground beneath, could feel his form becoming lighter, less tethered to earthly concerns. At the summit, a figure waited for them, tall, serene, wearing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself. Not Sarah or Tommy, but someone else. Someone whose presence filled Bo with a peace he'd never experienced in life or death. "Bo Redding," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in his bones. "You have served well in this place between worlds. Your time of healing is complete, and what happens now?" Bo asked, though part of him already knew. "Now you choose. Continue your service here as a guardian of lost souls, helping others find their way home. Or accept the peace that awaits beyond, where your family waits for you." Bo looked down at Ridge, who watched him with those patient, loving eyes. The dog's form was becoming more translucent with each passing moment, revealing his true nature, not an animal, but a spirit guide who had taken familiar form to help Bo through his journey. "If I stay," Bo said, "will I remember? Will I know what I am?" "You will know everything," the figure confirmed. "The choice must be made with full awareness, or it is no choice at all." Bo thought of the people he'd helped over the years, the families saved from storms and rock slides, and the 100 dangers that lurked in the high country. He thought of Sarah and Tommy, waiting for him in whatever realm lay beyond this one. Both choices carried love, both offered purpose, but as he stood on that impossible peak, feeling the weight of 15 years of unconscious service, Bo Redding finally understood what he was meant to do. The journal fell from his hands, its pages scattering on wind that carried them toward the valley below, where new guardians would find them when their time came. Where the cycle would continue, as it had for countless generations. Bo had found his answer. Now he just had to be brave enough to speak it aloud. The buried cabin door lay half-exposed beneath centuries of fallen pine needles and mountain debris, its weathered wood bearing the deep-carved letters that spelled out his name, Bo Redding. But these weren't fresh carvings. The letters had been worn smooth by decades of weather, as if they'd been waiting here since long before he was born. "This doesn't make sense," Bo said to Ridge, though by now he understood that sense had little to do with anything happening in this place between worlds. "How long has this been here?" Ridge pawed at the earth around the door, his meaning clear. "Dig deeper. Find what lies beneath." With trembling hands, Bo cleared away more debris, revealing the outline of a structure that had been buried by time and landslides. The cabin door was just the beginning. Beneath the accumulated earth lay a complete dwelling, preserved in perfect condition, despite its impossible age. The cosmic figure from the mountain peak had given him 3 days to make his choice. 3 days to decide between eternal service as a guardian or joining his family in whatever realm awaited beyond death. But first, the figure had said, there was one final test. One last soul who needed guidance home, the Anderson family. Bo had seen them in the vision that came with his restored memories. A mother, father, and twin daughters lost somewhere in the supernatural storm that had been building for the past week. Unlike the ordinary weather patterns Bo had learned to read, this storm existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, trapping souls who wandered too far from their intended paths. The Andersons weren't the usual lost hikers who occasionally wandered into his territory. They were dead, killed in a car accident on the mountain highway 3 days ago. But their spirits had become separated from the natural process of transition, confused and frightened by the sudden shift from life to death. It was Bo's job to find them and guide them home. But first, he needed to understand the true nature of this place, the hidden history that connected him to generations of guardians who had served before him. The buried cabin's interior defied physics and time. Room after room extended far beyond what the exterior structure could contain, each space filled with artifacts and memories from different eras. Bo found evidence of guardians stretching back centuries, Native American spirit guides, mountain men who'd taken on the role after death, park rangers, and wilderness experts who'd chosen service over rest. Each guardian had left their mark, their story preserved in objects and journals and carved messages on the walls. But it was the innermost room that took Bo's breath away. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, showing the souls who had been guided home over the decades. Families lost in storms, children who'd wandered too far from camp, climbers caught in avalanches, all saved by guardians who had given up their own eternal rest to serve others. And there, in the center of the wall, hung a frame that had been waiting for him. Inside was a photograph he'd never seen before, himself with Sarah and Tommy, taken on the day of the school trip. But in this version of the image, they were all smiling, all at peace. Even in death they looked happy. Beneath the photograph was an inscription in his own handwriting. "Love is the only force stronger than death." "Service is the only way to honor love." Ridge appeared beside him, no longer maintaining the illusion of solidity. The dog's true form was magnificent, a being of pure light and compassion, ancient beyond measure, yet filled with the same patient kindness Bo had come to know. "You've been waiting for me to find this place," Bo said. "All of it, the artifacts, the memories, the healing journey. It was leading here." Ridge's response came not as sound, but as direct understanding flooding Bo's mind. Yes, every guardian must choose freely, with full knowledge of what they're accepting. The test isn't just about willingness to serve, but about understanding the true cost and meaning of the choice. Bo studied the photographs on the wall, recognizing some of the faces from his recovered memories. Each soul he'd helped had mattered, had deserved the chance to find peace. The work was real, meaningful, essential to the cosmic balance between life and death, but it was also endless. Guardians served until they chose to move on, and some had been here for centuries, gradually wearing down under the weight of eternal responsibility. "What about you?" Bo asked Ridge. "How long have you been here?" Images flashed through Bo's mind. Ridge's true history, stretching back to the very beginning of human settlement in these mountains. He had been the first guardian, the one who established this sanctuary between worlds. He had been waiting not just for Bo, but for someone worthy to take his place, someone who could handle the responsibility of training new guardians. The realization hit Bo like a physical blow. This wasn't just about choosing between service and rest. This was about choosing whether to become the primary guardian, the one who would guide and train others as Ridge had guided him. Thunder rolled across the mountain, but this wasn't ordinary weather. The supernatural storm was intensifying, and somewhere within its chaos, the Anderson family was growing more lost with each passing hour. Bo could feel their terror and confusion like a physical weight on his chest. "They're running out of time," Bo said, understanding the urgency in Ridge's manner. Ridge nodded, then moved to a cabinet Bo hadn't noticed before. Inside were tools that no earthly guardian would need. A compass that pointed toward lost souls instead of magnetic north, a rope that could bridge dimensions, a lantern that illuminated spiritual rather than physical darkness. Bo picked up each tool, feeling their power resonate with something deep inside his being. This was his inheritance as a guardian, the means by which he could fulfill his purpose. But using them would be an irrevocable commitment to the path Ridge was offering. "The choice has to be made freely," Bo said, more to himself than to Ridge. "But if I don't choose now, if I don't go after them tonight, the Andersons will be lost forever." Ridge's expression conveyed infinite patience, but Bo could sense the urgency beneath it. Every moment of hesitation meant the Anderson family drifted further from salvation, deeper into the spiritual wilderness where even guardians couldn't reach them. Bo thought of Sarah and Tommy, waiting for him in whatever realm lay beyond this one. He thought of the peace that beckoned, the rest he'd earned through 15 years of unconscious service. He thought of holding his son again, of Sarah's laugh, of the simple joy of being together. Then he thought of the Anderson family, 2 little girls who would never see their next birthday, parents who would never watch their children grow up. He thought of all the souls who would become lost in the years to come, all the families who would need guidance through the dark passages between life and death. The supernatural storm raged louder outside the buried cabin, and Bo could feel the Anderson family's desperation growing. Time was running out, not just for them, but for his choice. Soon the cosmic forces at work would make the decision for him, and he would lose the chance to choose his own path. Bo strapped the guardian tools to his belt and moved toward the cabin door. Ridge followed, his form brightening with approval. Whether Bo had made his final choice or simply responded to immediate need, they would discover together. Outside, the storm transformed the familiar mountain landscape into something alien and threatening. Lightning crackled between dimensions, and the aurora borealis writhed across the sky like living things. This was the crucible where souls were tested, where the boundary between worlds grew thin enough for the lost to find their way home or to become trapped forever in the spaces between. Bo looked back at the buried cabin one last time, seeing it now as both sanctuary and prison, refuge and responsibility. Whatever choice he made tonight would echo through eternity. But first, he had to save the Anderson family. The rest could wait until after the work was done. Sarah's locket hung from a twisted pine branch, swaying gently in the supernatural wind that howled through dimensions. Bo's breath caught as he recognized it, the silver heart she'd worn every day of their marriage, engraved with their wedding date. But when he opened it, the photographs inside weren't just of their family. The images shifted and changed, showing different families across time, all the souls he would help if he chose the Guardian's path. The locket was warm to the touch, pulsing with energy that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. This was more than an artifact, it was a promise, a glimpse of the purpose that awaited if he committed himself fully to the work Ridge had been doing for centuries. "Sarah," Bo whispered, holding the locket against his chest. For a moment, he could swear he felt her presence, her approval, her understanding that love sometimes meant choosing service over reunion. The supernatural storm raged around them with increasing fury. Lightning crackled between worlds, illuminating glimpses of other dimensions where lost souls wandered in confusion. The Anderson family was out there somewhere, growing more frightened with each passing moment as they struggled to understand what had happened to them. Ridge materialized beside him, his form shifting between the familiar dog shape and something far more magnificent. Wings of pure light, eyes that held the wisdom of ages, a presence that commanded both awe and comfort. In his true form, Ridge was beautiful beyond description, a being of such power and compassion that Bo felt humbled just witnessing it. "Show me where they are," Bo said, clipping the locket to his belt beside the other Guardian tools. Ridge's response came as images flooding. Bo's mind, a family of 4 huddled beneath an overturned car on a stretch of highway that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They had died in the crash, but didn't understand their new state. Clinging to the familiar even as reality shifted around them, the mother, Patricia Anderson, held her twin daughters close, trying to shield them from wind that cut through their forms like knives. The father, Michael, stood guard over his family with desperate futility, unable to protect them from dangers he couldn't comprehend. They were trapped in a loop of their final moments, replaying the accident over and over, unable to accept the truth of their situation. Each repetition pulled them deeper into the spiritual wilderness, further from the path that would lead them home. Bo had perhaps an hour before they would be lost beyond all hope of rescue. The Guardian's compass spun wildly in his hand before finally settling on a direction that led directly into the heart of the storm. Bo shouldered his pack and stepped forward, feeling the mountains solid beneath his feet one moment and insubstantial the next. Reality flickered like a broken film reel, showing him glimpses of the Anderson family's last moments, mixed with visions of other rescues from across the centuries. Ridge moved ahead of him, his luminous form cutting through the dimensional chaos like a beacon. The path they followed existed in multiple states simultaneously, sometimes a familiar mountain trail, sometimes a highway slick with rain, Sometimes something that wasn't quite either, but partook of both. The storm tested Beau's resolve with each step. Phantom voices called his name, Sarah begging him to come home, Tommy asking why he wouldn't play catch anymore. The voices were designed to break his concentration, to make him doubt his purpose here. But Beau had faced these doubts during his journey of healing. He knew the difference between love and manipulation now. "I'm coming," he called to the Anderson family, though he wasn't sure they could hear him. "Hold on, help is coming." The first glimpse of them nearly broke his heart. They huddled together in the wreckage of their car, translucent forms flickering between solid and spectral. The twins couldn't have been more than 6 years old, their faces streaked with tears that fell upward into the chaotic sky. Patricia Anderson sang to them, a lullaby that wavered in and out of different keys as reality shifted around them. Michael Anderson saw Beau first, his eyes widening with desperate hope. "Thank God. Are you with the rescue squad? We've been trying to call for help, but our phones don't work. Something's wrong with—" He stopped, confusion clouding his features as he took in Beau's translucent appearance. The way the storm seemed to bend around him. "You're safe now," Beau said, approaching slowly. "I'm here to help. Who are you?" Patricia asked, clutching her daughters tighter. "How did you get here?" The road was blocked. Beau knelt beside them, understanding flooding through him as he saw their situation clearly. They were replaying their final moments, trapped in the trauma of their deaths. The car crash had been real, but it was over. They needed help accepting what had happened and moving on to whatever came next. "My name is Beau Redding," he said gently, "and I need you to listen very carefully. You were in an accident, a bad one, but you're safe now, all of you. The girls," Michael said, his voice breaking. "Are they hurt?" "They were in their car seats when the truck hit us. I tried to swerve, but there wasn't time. They're not hurt," Beau assured him. "None of you are hurt anymore." Ridge appeared beside them, his form shifting back to the familiar dog shape that would be less frightening for the children. The twins' eyes brightened immediately. Even in death, children recognized kindness when they saw it. "Doggy," one of them exclaimed, reaching out with translucent fingers. Ridge moved closer, allowing her to pet his luminous fur, and for a moment her form became more solid, more real. Beau understood what was happening. Contact with Ridge was helping them stabilize, giving them strength to face the truth. But they still needed to accept their deaths consciously, to choose the path forward, rather than remaining trapped in their final moments. "Patricia," Beau said, meeting the mother's frightened gaze, "I need you to think carefully. What's the last thing you remember before you found yourselves here?" Her face crumpled as the memories surfaced. "We were driving home from Emma's piano recital. It was raining and the roads were slick. That truck came around the curve too fast, crossed into our lane. Michael tried to avoid it, but there wasn't time," Beau finished gently. "The impact was immediate. You didn't suffer. Are you saying Michael's voice caught. "That we're dead?" Beau nodded, his heart breaking for them. "I'm sorry. But that's not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a different one." The storm intensified around them, as if responding to their growing understanding. Lightning split the sky, and through the cracks, Beau could see glimpses of something beautiful, a realm of light and peace, where other souls moved with purpose and joy. "I don't understand," Patricia whispered. "If we're dead, why are we still here? Why can we still think and feel?" "Because love doesn't end with death," Beau explained, the words coming from knowledge he'd gained during his own journey. "The love you have for each other, for your daughters, that's keeping you together, helping you transition. But you have to choose to move forward." Ridge moved between the family members, his presence calming their fears and strengthening their forms. Through their connection to him, they began to see beyond the accident, beyond the trauma that had trapped them. "Where do we go?" one of the twins asked, her voice small but curious rather than frightened. Beau smiled, pointing toward the cracks of light in the storm clouds. "Home! To a place where families are never separated, where love is the only thing that matters." But even as he spoke, Beau felt the weight of his own choice pressing down on him. To guide them fully to that realm of light, he would have to make his own decision. Stay as guardian, or follow them into whatever lay beyond. The Anderson family looked to him with trust and hope, waiting for him to lead them home. And Bo Redding finally understood that some choices could only be made in the crucible of serving others. The golden key materialized in Bo's palm as the Anderson family began to understand their situation. Its metal warm with otherworldly energy. This was the final tool, the most important one, the key that could open doorways between the realm of the lost and the realm of eternal peace. But using it required a guardian to make the ultimate sacrifice, to choose eternal service over personal rest. "I can see something," Patricia Anderson whispered, her eyes fixed on the cracks of light that had begun to appear in the storm clouds above them. "There's someone there waiting for us." Bo followed her gaze and saw them too, figures of pure light standing at the threshold between worlds. Patricia's mother, who had died 5 years earlier. Michael's father, lost to cancer the previous winter. And behind them, countless other souls who had crossed over before, all waiting to welcome the Anderson family home. "Grandma?" one of the twins whispered, her translucent form brightening with recognition and joy, but the doorway remained closed, blocked by the family's lingering attachment to their earthly existence. They could see their destination, but couldn't reach it without help. That's where the golden key came in, and where Bo's choice would finally be made. Ridge appeared beside him in his magnificent true form, wings of light spread wide against the storm. When he spoke, his voice resonated with the authority of centuries spent in service. "The key opens the door," Ridge explained, his words reaching not just Bo, but the Anderson family as well. "But the one who uses it must remain behind to ensure safe passage. The guardian becomes the anchor between worlds." Bo understood. Using the golden key would save the Anderson family, would guide them safely to the realm where their loved ones waited. But it would also bind him permanently to his role as guardian, ending any possibility of joining Sarah and Tommy in the afterlife. "There has to be another way," Michael Anderson said, having overheard Ridge's explanation. "We won't let you sacrifice yourself for us. We'll find another path," but Bo could see the truth in Ridge's ancient eyes. There was no other path, not for souls as lost as the Anderson family had become. They had been trapped too long, had sunk too deep into the spiritual wilderness. Without the key, they would fade away completely, lost forever in the spaces between worlds. "It's not a sacrifice," Bo said, the words feeling true as he spoke them. "It's a choice, and it's mine to make." He thought of Sarah and Tommy, of the peace that awaited him beyond the veil. The longing for reunion was still there, sharp and immediate. But stronger than that, longing was something else. The understanding that love meant more than personal happiness. Love meant service, protection, putting others' needs before your own. Sarah would understand. She had always understood that his deepest calling was to help people, to use his knowledge of the wilderness to keep others safe. Tommy would be proud of his father for choosing to help other children, other families who needed guidance home. The golden key grew warmer in Bo's hand, responding to his growing resolve. Around them, the supernatural storm began to calm, as if sensing that the moment of decision had arrived. "Bo," Ridge said quietly, "are you certain? Once the key is used, there is no going back. You will become what I have been, guardian, guide, protector of lost souls. The work is endless, the responsibility eternal." Bo looked at the Anderson family, at the two little girls who reminded him so much of Tommy with their bright curiosity and resilience. He thought of all the other families who would become lost in the years to come, all the souls who would need guidance through the dark passages between life and death. "I'm certain," Bo said, and meant it completely. He stepped forward and inserted the golden key into a lock that existed in the air itself, turning it with steady hands despite the magnitude of what he was choosing. The doorway blazed open, revealing a realm of such beauty and peace that even looking at it brought tears to his eyes. The Anderson family's forms became solid and radiant as the doorway opened for them. Patricia and Michael took their daughters' hands, all of them glowing with the joy of homecoming. The figures of light on the other side reached out in welcome, family reunited, love eternal and unbroken. "Thank you," Patricia said to Bo, her voice filled with gratitude that seemed to encompass lifetimes. "We'll never forget what you've done for us." "Remember to look out for each other," Bo replied. "That's all that matters in any world." The Anderson family stepped through the doorway together, moving toward their waiting loved ones with steps that grew lighter with each moment. As they crossed the threshold, their forms became pure light, indistinguishable from the realm that welcomed them home. But the doorway remained open, held stable by Bo's choice and the power of the golden key. Through it, he could see other figures moving in the distance, Sarah and Tommy among them, watching with expressions of infinite love and understanding. Sarah stepped closer to the threshold, close enough that Bo could see her smile, could feel the warmth of her approval. She placed her hand against the barrier between worlds, and for a moment, Bo felt her touch against his own palm. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice carrying across dimensions. "This is who you were always meant to be." Tommy appeared beside her, grinning with the boundless enthusiasm Bo remembered so well. "Dad, you're going to help so many people. That's so cool." The sight of them filled Bo with a peace he'd never experienced, even in life. They were happy, they were together, and they understood his choice. The guilt that had driven him to these mountains was finally completely gone, replaced by purpose and certainty. "I love you both," Bo called across the divide. "Always, always," Sarah replied, and then she and Tommy stepped back into the light, knowing that their love would endure even across the separation. The doorway began to close as the Anderson family completed their journey, the golden light fading until only ordinary storm clouds remained. But the key in Bo's hand had transformed, becoming a permanent part of him, a tool he would carry for as long as souls needed guidance home. Ridge approached, his magnificent form beginning to fade as his long service finally came to an end. "The mountains are yours now," he said, his voice filled with satisfaction and relief. "Use them well." "Wait," Bo called. But Ridge was already dissolving into light, becoming one with the eternal realm he had helped so many others reach. His final gift was a flood of knowledge, centuries of experience, techniques for finding lost souls, wisdom about the nature of death and transition. Bo stood alone on the mountain peak as the supernatural storm faded into ordinary weather. But he didn't feel alone. He could sense them out there, the souls who would need his help, the families who would require guidance through their darkest moments. His work was just beginning. The transformation was complete. Bo Redding was no longer a broken man hiding from his grief. He was a guardian, a bridge between worlds, a servant of love that transcended death itself, and for the first time since the rockslide that had ended his mortal life, Bo Redding was exactly where he belonged. The new compass rested in Bo's weathered hands, its brass surface gleaming with more than reflected sunlight. Where his grandfather's broken compass had once pointed uselessly at nothing, this guardian's compass moved with purpose and certainty, not toward magnetic north, but toward souls in need of guidance home. 3 months had passed since Ridge transferred his ancient responsibility to Bo. 3 months of learning to navigate his new existence as guardian of the mountain realm between worlds. The compass had appeared on his mantle the morning after his choice, alongside Tommy's baseball glove and Sarah's wedding ring, artifacts of his human life that now served as reminders of why his eternal service mattered. This morning, the compass needle pointed steadily northeast, toward Copper Canyon, where a young climber named David Chen had fallen to his death 2 days earlier. Like so many others, David's spirit had become confused in the transition, unable to accept his fate and move on to whatever waited beyond. He was Bo's responsibility now, another lost soul who needed guidance through the dark passages. Between life and death, Bo tucked the compass into his jacket and set out across terrain that had become both more familiar and more mysterious since his transformation. The mountains existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously now, showing him paths that had always been there but invisible to mortal eyes. Stone formations that had seemed solid revealed themselves as doorways. Alpine lakes reflected not just sky, but glimpses of other realms where souls found their final rest. The work was exactly what Ridge had promised: endless, challenging, essential. Each lost soul presented a unique puzzle. Their attachment to earthly existence manifested in different ways. Some, like the Anderson family, needed help accepting their deaths. Others clung to unfinished business, unable to move on until they found resolution. A few had become so lost in the spiritual wilderness that Bo had to track them across multiple dimensions, following trails of memory and emotion that led through landscapes of pure thought. But the work was also deeply fulfilling in ways Bo had never expected. Each successful rescue felt like a small victory over the chaos that separated loved ones. Every family reunited beyond the veil added meaning to his choice. The gratitude in Patricia Anderson's voice still echoed in his memory, a reminder that some services were worth any price. David Chen proved to be one of the more challenging cases. Bo found him clinging to the cliff face where he'd fallen, replaying his final climb over and over in an endless loop of determination and failure. The young man was a perfectionist, unwilling to accept that even the most skilled climbers sometimes made fatal mistakes. "I can make this move," David insisted when Bo appeared beside him on the impossible cliff. "I've done it 100 times in the gym. The hold is there, I just need to commit fully." "The hold was never there," Bo said gently, his voice carrying the authority that came with his guardian nature. "The rock was loose. It was always going to give way." "No, that's not right. I checked my route. I'm careful. I don't make mistakes like that." Bo understood the young man's struggle. Accepting death meant accepting fallibility, admitting that even the most prepared person could be undone by circumstances beyond their control. For someone like David, whose identity was built around mastery and precision, that admission felt like losing everything that made him who he was. "Being human means making mistakes," Bo explained, settling beside David on the spectral cliff face. "It means being vulnerable to forces beyond our control. That's not weakness, that's just the condition of mortal existence." It took hours of patient conversation, but eventually David began to understand. His death hadn't been caused by incompetence or lack of preparation. Sometimes mountains claimed even the most skilled climbers, just as rock slides could kill devoted fathers who thought they were protecting their families. When David finally released his grip on the cliff face, Bo guided him to the passage that would take him home. The young man's parents waited on the other side, their love unchanged by death. Another successful rescue, another family reunited, walking back toward his cabin as evening painted the peaks gold and crimson. Bo reflected on how much had changed since that October night when he'd found Ridge caught in the thorns. The mountain that had been his exile had become his purpose. The isolation that had been his punishment transformed into service. He was no longer the broken man who had fled to these peaks 15 years ago. The guilt that had consumed him was gone, replaced by understanding and acceptance. Sarah and Tommy were at peace, and their love continued to guide him even across the divide between worlds. His human life had ended in tragedy, but his existence as guardian was filled with meaning. The compass in his pocket gave a gentle pulse, alerting him to another soul in need somewhere to the south. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve. The work would never end, but Bo had found something in eternal service that he'd never achieved in mortal life: perfect alignment between his deepest nature and his chosen purpose. Back at the cabin, Bo lit the oil lamp and opened the journal where he recorded each rescue, each lesson learned in his guardian service. The pages were filling quickly with stories of souls found and families reunited, a growing testament to the impact one person could have when they chose service over self-interest. Outside, Aurora Borealis danced across the sky despite being far too far south for such displays, a reminder that the normal rules didn't apply in this place between worlds. The lights swirled in patterns that seemed almost like writing, messages from the realm beyond where souls found their eternal rest. Bo smiled as he recognized some of the patterns. Sarah and Tommy, sending their love across impossible distances. Ridge, checking in on his successor. The Anderson family, adding their gratitude to the cosmic conversation. All the souls he'd helped over the months, their continued existence proof that death was transition rather than ending. The compass on his mantle caught the lamplight, its needle steady and true. Somewhere out there, another lost soul was waiting for guidance home. Tomorrow, Bo would answer that call, as he would answer all the calls that came after. He had found his true calling at last, not as Bo Redding the park ranger, not as Bo Redding the broken hermit, but as Bo Redding the guardian, the bridge between worlds, the servant of love that transcended death itself. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying promises of souls to save and purposes to fulfill. Bo Redding closed his journal and prepared for sleep, content in the knowledge that when morning came, he would once again have the chance to prove that some bonds were stronger than death, some love more powerful than loss. In the realm beyond the veil, Sarah and Tommy watched their husband and father with infinite pride, knowing that he had finally found his way home, not to them but to himself, to the man he was always meant to be. The compass needle twitched slightly, pointing toward tomorrow's purpose. Bo smiled and settled into sleep, ready for whatever challenges the dawn might bring, to a guardian who had learned that the greatest adventures began not with seeking glory for yourself, but with choosing to serve something larger than your own desires. The story had ended where it began, with a lost soul finding salvation. The difference was that now Bo understood. Sometimes the soul that needed saving was your own, and sometimes the only way to find it was by helping others find theirs.